Viewers, on the other hand, Air India is set to scale back operations sharply, cutting around 100 flights a day as soaring jet fuel prices squeeze airline finances. Now, the reductions will impact both domestic and international routes, with the steepest cuts on long-haul services to Europe, North America, Australia and Singapore starting June. The rising fuel costs, now accounting for a major share of operating expenses, are making several routes financially unviable. Now, industry-wide concerns are also mounting, with airlines warning of further service cuts unless cost pressure ease. Now, higher fuel prices along with longer flight paths due to airspace restrictions are adding to the strain, raising the likelihood of costlier tickets and reduced connectivity in the coming weeks. Now, viewers, I'm being joined by my colleague Karthik Malhotra from the newsroom. Now, Karthik, it's a big development coming in where Air India says that it's set to scale back operations sharply, cutting around 100 flights a day. Karthik.
That's right, Savya. In fact, 100 flights still seems a much smaller number as compared to, let's say, what you're looking in Europe, where Lufthansa has decided to cut as many as 20,000 flights. So Air India, obviously, also at the receiving end, like every other airline, major airline in the world. And I think the concern really is the rising prices of ATF, the aviation turbine fuel, which was trading under $100 a barrel till before the war started and is now up sharply by about 80% or so, to a little under $180 a barrel. So ATF obviously is burning a big hole in the coffers, in the pockets of airlines across the world. Air India, no exception to that. And also, of course, there is a rising cost, and then there is also a limited supply of ATF, because airlines worldwide, India being one exception, airlines worldwide have been dependent on China to provide ATF, the refined ATF. And that is something that India, because of its own sort of refining capacity, has not really been dependent on. But if you look at European flights, American flights, they've largely been dependent on China refining crude into ATF and exporting it back to the aviation companies to use. But in the case of Air India, obviously, I think the whole elevation of prices is something which is getting the management to decide that perhaps keeping those 100 additional flights serviceable is not going to be financially viable.
Well, Karthik, we have seen that all the airlines, whether it is Air India, Indigo, SpiceJet, Akasa, all of them writing letters to the Civil Aviation Ministry regarding some relief. So has there any chances that the government is talking with the airlines, and in the future we can see some relief from the ministry?
So I don't think the concern has to do with the government talking to airlines, because airlines unfortunately are at the receiving end of this high input cost which is accruing to them. But at the same time, the government has gone ahead and cut the windfall tax. So windfall tax again is something which the government had added on to oil marketing companies at a time when oil prices were below $60 a barrel. In fact, in the immediate aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine war, we had seen oil prices spike, and then as India started purchasing the discounted Russian oil, the government added the windfall tax. And that windfall tax was primarily because oil companies were profiting a lot more than the normal norm at that time. The idea of the government was to not reduce prices but build its own coffers by adding the windfall tax. And now that windfall tax has been slashed. So that in effect means that oil marketing companies will not have to pay that additional duty to the government on the profits they are making, because as you know, for the last 2 months plus they have been making losses. So the idea is that the government is trying to sort of ease the burden of oil marketing companies which have a higher input cost by cutting, of course, the windfall tax, and also now reducing the export duty on both ATF as well as commercial diesel. So these are steps that the government has taken. The government has also categorically stated that it's not going to increase petrol and diesel prices or domestic LPG prices for that matter, even though commercial LPG prices have increased. So I think it's a fine, tough balancing act which the government is trying to do. It's a tight rope that the government is trying to walk, because you don't want to hit consumers directly with increased fuel prices, but the indirect impact, whether it is to do with eating out when it comes to restaurants which are now going to get more expensive commercial LPG, or flying which is likely to become more expensive with increased ATF costs, leading of course to higher airfares.
Well, Karthik, with the concerns mounting, can we see further service cuts?
I mean, it's tough to say. It completely depends on how long this conflict or rather this fragile truce right now between US and Iran is likely to continue, how long the naval blockade that the US has installed on Iranian ports is likely to continue. Also, bear in mind, the fact is that UAE has quit OPEC and OPEC Plus, so which means that the strength of that cartel gets reduced because the suppliers within the OPEC and OPEC Plus cartel get reduced, and UAE was, of course, the third largest producer of crude. So there could be a new sort of fresh supply of crude from UAE in the coming weeks or so. But how soon that's going to happen, how soon all of these elements are going to converge into a trajectory which affirms some sort of a positive direction for sectors including aviation is tough to say. And hence, I think Air India, in my sort of educated view at this moment, is perhaps taking just the first step of cutting 100 flights. We could potentially see more disruption in skies and not just limited to Air India alone.